You mentioned what it would be like to compete against Max Verstappen right now. What are your expectations for his teammate, Sergio Perez, after 2 weekends that were, I don't want to say overall disappointing, but two qualifying, certainly in Monaco and Spain, that were disappointing for Sergio Perez?
That's exactly right. It has been a very clear weakness, isn't it? The last two races, and qualifying is when the most pressure is on. So you got to wonder whether the pressure's just got to him a little bit. Because if we rewind to Baku, we were talking about him as a potential title contender, because what he'd shown us to that point is that while he wasn't quite on Max's level, he was able to take advantage when things went wrong for Max. And also you felt he was way closer than he's ever been before. Now it doesn't look like that. It's changed a lot recently. And I was in his media session in Barcelona ahead of the race weekend, so on the Thursday, and he was asked about 3 times, do you still think you can win this championship? And of course he said yes. I mean, what else can he say, right? He has to say yes. Sure. He has to back himself. But now after that second race of it going wrong, because those questions were coming about, they seemed a little bit harsh, but coming about because of what had happened in Monaco and the big mistake he'd made in Q1, which had set his whole weekend back and meant he'd scored 0 points. And so, you felt, well, he can answer these questions. The best way he can answer them is going out at Barcelona, a track which everyone thought was going to suit Max Verstappen more than Perez anyway, and getting close or beating Max. And he was so far from that, wasn't he? So it's rough. It's rough. I mean, the one thing in his to his advantage maybe this weekend is that Canada is a bit more like a street track. We always talk about Checo being great on street tracks. Max,
King of the streets.
King of the streets, right? And I actually asked him about that in that Thursday session, and he was like, I mean, I kind of see where it's coming from. I understand it, but his opinion was that, look, if you are really good on street circuits, you should be just as good on normal racing circuits, because actually the street circuits are
more difficult.
Take that little bit more extra concentration. Exactly, more difficult. The walls are closer, and so he felt like, if I can be that close to Max there, then I can be that close to him everywhere. But of course, Monaco didn't go that well anyway. So yeah, it's a tough one for Checo right now, and I can't really see, unless we see some bad luck for Max over the next few rounds, a way back into this championship for him, because once that die is cast and it just starts spiraling downwards for a driver, we've seen it so many times before in a direct championship between two teammates. We've seen it with Valtteri Bottas and Lewis Hamilton, Rubens Barrichello, Michael Schumacher, if you want to go back a few years, Mark Webber, Sebastian Vettel. So many times, once the downward spiral starts, it's so hard to get out of it, especially when your competitor, your rival, is as good as Max Verstappen, and he's not going to make many mistakes. So yeah, it's a tough one. I don't know. I mean, Checo, go and prove me wrong is all I can say, because I'd love to see a championship battle.
What's the terms of his deal currently? I know he signed the extension after winning Monaco a year ago, but how many more years left does he have on that deal with Red Bull?
Yeah, so I believe it's to the end of next year, 2024. Okay. I haven't double checked that, but I think that's
just
right.
curious, not.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's a fair question.
Alluding to anything.
No, it's a question that a lot of people are asking, because what kicked it off a little bit was, remember Brazil last year, where Max refused to move over and give Checo some extra points in his fight for second place in the championship. And that then unearthed this big controversy between the two over what happened in Monaco last year, and Checo crashing in qualifying again, but actually to his advantage that time round. And so then a lot of these questions were being asked. They're like, well, this is Max's team. How can they, survive until the end of 2024 if these two drivers are at war? But I guess one way to make it easy for both sides is if one driver is clearly much further ahead, and then any kind of squabbles over things don't have quite the same impact as when they're fighting each other for a championship. So I feel like if Checo keeps his head down, he can absolutely see the end of that contract. But it hasn't kind of been it hasn't gone unrecognized that there is Daniel Ricciardo knocking around, very keen to get into a competitive car. And so should we end up in a situation where something does go wrong, I'm not saying it will, or a situation where Red Bull no longer believe Perez is the right driver, not saying that's the case at the moment, because the mood music suggests otherwise, they do have Daniel Ricciardo there as a potential replacement, and also a really interesting experiment to see what would happen, right? I mean, but this is the thing, though, isn't it? If we look at Max Verstappen and his teammates over the years, starting with Daniel Ricciardo left because one of the reasons it seemed to be that he felt that he could not compete with Max at Red Bull. Then we had Pierre Gasly step up, probably a bit too early. couldn't deal with it, completely underperformed compared to where we know he could be. Then Alex Albon steps up again, pretty much the same story. Started off well, but just couldn't keep up the consistency. Again, probably promoted way too early in his career to be in that position, but ultimately it wasn't there what was needed to compete with Max. And then Checo came in and we're like, finally an experienced driver who's going to kind of, you know, really take the challenge to Max. And again, same thing over time, Max has just ground him down. But I think the one constant for all this is just how good Max is. You know, like we know
it's
Checo
consistency.
That's it. And we know Checo is a good driver. So, you know, we know he is among that kind of like very good F1 driver, perhaps not very top tier, as we found out the last couple of years, but incredibly good. And you know, that's just shows you what level Max is on.
And according to EA, sixth best driver currently on the grid.
Okay. And who am I to disagree with that?
Exactly.
Just don't view my driver rankings from last year because it might not.
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube. And for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN Plus.